Hey guys, tonight we wake before the first pale hint of sunrise reaches the rooftops of the greatest city the ancient world has ever known. The air is cool, carrying the smoky scent of dying hearth fires mixed with damp stone, fresh bread, and the faint smell of animals already stirring in crowded alleyways. Somewhere nearby, sandals scrape against ancient paving stones, long before most modern people would even think about opening their eyes. You probably imagine the Roman Empire as a place of marble temples, roaring gladiators, and extravagant banquets. But you have a much more immediate problem. If someone notices that you have absolutely nothing to do today, well, you probably won't survive this reputation with your dignity intact. No lions required. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know your location and your local time down in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where people around the world are joining these quiet nighttime journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is that Rome wakes before the sun does. You do not. Rome wakes you. A cart rattles across uneven stones outside your small room. A mule complains loudly enough to make you wonder whether it shares your opinion about mornings. Someone is already shouting prices for vegetables that have barely arrived from the countryside. Somewhere above, a neighbour empties yesterday's dirty water into the street with only the briefest warning. Welcome to another perfectly ordinary Roman morning. You stretch for only a moment before reminding yourself that stretching for too long begins to resemble laziness. That may sound ridiculous today, but appearances matter here almost as much as reality. The strangest part, nobody has officially forbidden free time. There is no law carved into marble declaring, "Thou shalt never relax." Yet everyone behaves as though such a law exists. That invisible expectation follows you everywhere. As you step outside, every pair of eyes seems to be measuring everyone else's usefulness. Men hurry toward workshops carrying tools polished from years of use. Apprentices jog behind masters trying not to fall behind. Farmers arriving from outside the city balance baskets heavy with vegetables, grain, olives, or cheese. Everyone appears to have somewhere important to be. Everyone appears occupied. Whether they actually are is another matter entirely. This obsession grows from something much deeper than simple economics. Romans admire effort, not merely success. Effort. Visible effort. If someone sees you carrying scrolls through the forum, they assume important business awaits you. Whether those scrolls contain brilliant legal arguments or yesterday's shopping list hardly matters from a distance. Looking busy has value. Looking idle has consequences. Centuries later, people will invent expressions like idle hands, but the Romans hardly need a proverb. They simply live it every day. Respect must constantly be earned. Honour cannot sit still. Even wealthy citizens understand this strange rule. Money alone never guarantees admiration. Families boasting generations of distinguished ancestors still compete to demonstrate discipline, public service, and devotion to Rome. You quickly realise this society treats reputation almost like another currency. Spend it wisely, lose it carelessly. Recovering it becomes painfully difficult. One of the fascinating historical facts about ancient Rome is that elite men often pursued what they called the cursus honorum, a sequence of public offices that ambitious citizens hoped to climb throughout adulthood. Political careers demanded relentless visibility. The more people saw you contributing to public life, the stronger your standing became. Remaining unseen achieved the opposite. You continue walking toward the forum. The city expands around you with astonishing energy. Merchants unlock shutters. Builders already strike stone with rhythmic blows. Priests prepare temples before sunrise ceremonies begin. Clerks arrange wax tablets. Messengers hurry between households. The empire itself seems powered by movement. Standing still almost feels unnatural. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans genuinely believed constant activity made someone morally superior, or whether social pressure alone forced everyone into performing endless busyness. Perhaps both explanations are true. Either way, the result remains unmistakable. Movement becomes virtue. Stillness invites suspicion. Even conversation has purpose. Friends greet one another while discussing business. Neighbours exchange favours. Clients gather outside the homes of wealthy patrons before dawn, hoping to accompany them into public life. Relationships themselves become part of daily duty. Imagine trying to explain the modern concept of doing absolutely nothing today. Your Roman neighbours would stare politely, then become deeply uncomfortable. Nothing? Nothing at all? Surely you must be ill, or hiding from creditors, or planning something suspicious. Because respectable people always have obligations. This expectation reaches beyond work itself. A father teaches his son not only practical skills but also self-discipline. A merchant maintains trust through reliability. A senator demonstrates commitment through public appearances. Even retired soldiers often continue serving local communities. Life becomes a performance of responsibility, sometimes sincere, sometimes carefully staged. One surprisingly quirky detail survives from Roman writers who occasionally mocked people pretending to be busier than they really were. Some individuals reportedly wandered important public places simply hoping others would assume they had serious appointments waiting. In other words, theatrical productivity existed long before office workers invented walking quickly while carrying a clipboard. Human nature changes remarkably little. As the morning grows brighter, sunlight slowly washes across marble columns, turning cold grey stone into warm gold. Beautiful though it is, few people pause to admire it. Admiring sunrise accomplishes nothing visible. Someone always has somewhere else to be. You begin noticing another subtle rule. Time itself belongs less to you than to everyone around you. Family expects you. Clients expect you. Neighbours observe you. Employers need you. The city quietly claims every hour before you've even decided how to spend it. Perhaps that explains why free time becomes strangely threatening. Not because rest itself is evil. Because rest interrupts expectation. Expectation forms identity. Identity shapes honour. Honour supports Rome. At least that is how many Romans see the chain connecting one ordinary morning to the survival of an empire stretching across continents. Whether the logic truly holds hardly matters. People believe it. Belief changes behaviour. Behaviour builds culture. Culture becomes invisible. Eventually nobody remembers choosing these rules. They simply inherit them. And so, almost without realising it, you quicken your pace. Not because anyone ordered you, because everyone else already has. The streets continue filling. Doors open. Voices rise. The city fully awakens. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the discipline, beneath the polished image every respectable Roman struggles to maintain, a quiet question begins following you through the morning. What happens to a civilization when people become afraid of simply resting? The morning carries you deeper into Rome before you have much time to think. The streets are now crowded enough that simply standing still feels like trying to stop the current of a fast-moving river. Tunics brush against your shoulders. Donkeys squeeze through impossibly narrow lanes. Shopkeepers call out prices with cheerful determination, while somewhere nearby a blacksmith's hammer keeps a steady rhythm that almost becomes part of the city's heartbeat. You quickly understand something unusual. Nobody asks, "Are you happy?" Instead, people silently ask a different question. "Are you useful?" That single difference shapes nearly every corner of Roman life. You fall into step beside dozens of other citizens making their way toward the Forum. It is less a marketplace than the enormous beating heart of Rome itself. Politics, religion, business, legal disputes, gossip, friendships, and rivalries all swirl together beneath towering columns. If you want people to remember your name, this is where you're seen. If you disappear for too long, people begin to wonder why. That thought would make many modern people uncomfortable, but for a Roman citizen, visibility is almost a moral duty. Honor is never something you simply possess. It is something you perform every day, again and again. The Romans even had a word that captures part of this idea: dignitas. It is difficult to translate perfectly into English. It means dignity, certainly, but also reputation, influence, respect, and the weight of a person's public character. You cannot buy dignitas. You build it slowly through years of disciplined behaviour, responsible decisions, and visible service to family and state, and like a carefully stacked tower of stones, it can collapse surprisingly fast. Suppose you spend several mornings sleeping late while everyone else is already conducting business. Nobody confronts you directly. Romans are often subtler than that. Instead, conversations begin changing. I haven't seen him lately. I wonder whether something is wrong. He used to be much more dependable. Those quiet observations spread faster than any official accusation. Soon your absence begins telling its own story, whether true or not. Historians still argue whether Roman society genuinely believed constant public engagement created better citizens, or whether these expectations mainly served ambitious elites who benefited from keeping everyone focused on duty. Ancient writers themselves disagree. Some praised relentless discipline, while others quietly admitted that the pressure could become exhausting. You can almost feel that pressure pressing against your own shoulders now. Even standing near the Forum requires careful attention. How do you carry yourself? Who greets you? Who ignores you? Which conversations include your voice? Everything communicates status. Nothing feels entirely private. You notice an older senator crossing the square. His white toga is brilliantly clean despite the dusty streets. Several younger men walk respectfully behind him, listening as he speaks. They nod at nearly every sentence. Is he sharing profound political wisdom? Perhaps. Or perhaps he's explaining where to find the freshest olives. From a distance, no one can tell. The important thing is that he appears engaged in meaningful affairs. Appearance matters almost as much as reality. This may sound surprisingly modern. Many people today answer emails they barely need to send, attend meetings that accomplish little, or remain online simply because looking busy feels safer than appearing idle. The Romans would probably understand that instinct immediately. One mainstream historical fact illustrates this perfectly. Wealthy Roman patrons participated in the salutatio, an early morning ritual in which clients visited their homes to pay respects before accompanying them through parts of the day's public activities. These gatherings reinforced political alliances, social obligations, and personal loyalty. Missing them too often could quietly weaken valuable relationships. Even friendship carries responsibility. You begin noticing another layer beneath all this movement. Nobody seems to belong entirely to themselves. Parents belong to their children. Children belong to family expectations. Clients belong to patrons. Magistrates belong to the Republic, or later, the Empire. Soldiers belong to their commanders. Priests belong to the gods. Individual freedom exists, certainly, but duty always arrives first. As you continue walking, the smell of baking bread drifts from nearby ovens. For just a moment, you imagine sitting beside one of them with warm bread, fresh olives, perhaps a little cheese, and absolutely nothing planned for the rest of the day. The fantasy lasts about 3 seconds. Someone would almost certainly interrupt you, not because relaxing is forbidden, because surely there must be something more productive you could be doing. repairing a wall, helping a relative, meeting a client, checking on investments, preparing for tomorrow. The list never truly ends. Curiously, some Roman writers joked about men who became almost addicted to appearing important. One satirical story describes individuals marching briskly across the forum with serious expressions, only to circle back repeatedly because they had nowhere in particular to go. Looking occupied became a performance worthy of the finest actors. Apparently pretending to have meetings is older than many civilizations. The city itself encourages this mindset. Everywhere you look, monuments celebrate achievement. Triumphal arches honour victories. Statues remember politicians. Temples commemorate generosity. Public buildings preserve names for generations. Very few monuments celebrate someone who enjoyed a wonderfully relaxing afternoon nap. Perhaps history itself favours busy people. Or perhaps busy people simply commission more statues. The distinction is worth considering. As noon approaches, sunlight reflects brilliantly from marble walls, making parts of the forum almost dazzling. Voices overlap into one endless murmur punctuated by occasional laughter, arguments, and the distant call of merchants advertising everything from spices to sandals. No corner feels silent, no moment feels entirely your own. Yet, beneath the noise, another truth slowly emerges. Many Romans genuinely believe they are protecting something precious: discipline, responsibility, stability. Their ancestors built this city through sacrifice, military service, hard labour, and strict self-control. If later generations grow too comfortable, too indulgent, too fond of leisure, what happens to Rome? That question lingers everywhere. Few people answer it directly. Instead, they simply keep working. One task after another, one obligation after another, one carefully maintained reputation after another. You glance around the forum one more time. Thousands of people move with purpose. Some truly possess urgent responsibilities. Others merely look as though they do. From a distance you cannot tell the difference, and perhaps that is the point. Because in Rome, being seen as honourable often begins long before anyone discovers whether you actually are. The crowd gradually thins as you leave the busiest corner of the forum, but the feeling of being watched never quite disappears. Even when no one seems to be paying attention, you catch yourself walking a little straighter, a little faster, as though invisible judges line every street. It is remarkable how quickly you begin policing yourself. No soldier commands you, no magistrate follows behind, yet you still adjust your pace. That is the quiet power of Roman society. Its rules do not always need to be spoken aloud. They live inside the people. You soon discover that being a Roman citizen means carrying far more than your own daily schedule. Every role you occupy brings another set of expectations. You are someone's son, someone's father, someone's neighbour, someone's client, someone's business partner, someone's voter, someone's witness, or perhaps someone's debtor. Each relationship ties another thread around your day. Soon enough your calendar no longer belongs entirely to you. Imagine waking this morning hoping for a peaceful day with absolutely no plans. Rome politely laughs at the idea. Before breakfast is finished, someone needs a favour. By mid-morning, another obligation appears. By afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrives. By evening, you remember tomorrow's responsibilities. Free time shrinks not because someone steals it, but because duty quietly fills every empty space. The Romans even had a powerful concept that helped explain this way of thinking: officium. It is another Latin word with no perfect English equivalent. It means duty, obligation, service, and moral responsibility all wrapped together. An officium is not merely something you are required to do. It is something a good person ought to do, even when nobody forces them. That distinction changes everything. If work is simply mandatory, you obey because you must. If work becomes part of your character, you obey because that is who you believe yourself to be. Rome prefers the second version. Children begin learning this almost as soon as they can walk. A young boy watches his father greet visitors before sunrise. He observes respectful conversation. He notices careful manners. He sees promises made and remembered. No formal classroom is necessary. Daily life itself becomes the lesson. A daughter watches her mother managing the household with astonishing precision. Food must be prepared, clothing repaired, religious rituals remembered, guests welcomed appropriately. Every successful day appears effortless only because enormous effort hides beneath the surface. Responsibility becomes ordinary. That may sound exhausting. For many Romans, it simply feels normal. One mainstream historical fact reflects this perfectly. Roman fathers possessed considerable legal authority within the household through a tradition known as patria potestas. Although its practical application varied over time, the ideal emphasized that the head of the family carried enormous responsibility for guiding, protecting, and representing the household. Leadership was inseparable from duty. Power always arrived carrying obligations of its own. Historians still argue whether everyday Roman families actually lived according to these strict ideals, or whether writers exaggerated them to encourage moral behaviour. Ancient authors often describe the perfect Roman household, but real families, like families everywhere, were probably much messier than the ideals suggest. Children argued, parents lost patience, neighbours gossiped, someone almost certainly forgot to buy the olives. Human nature has always resisted perfection. As you continue through a quieter neighbourhood, you notice small shrines tucked beside doorways. Families pause briefly before them, offering silent prayers to household gods. Even these simple moments remind you that religion is not separated from ordinary life. The gods expect attention. Ancestors deserve remembrance. Traditions require continuation. Another small piece of the day belongs elsewhere. You begin adding everything together. Family, religion, business, politics, friendship, community. Each responsibility seems reasonable on its own. Together they leave remarkably little space for doing absolutely nothing. Curiously, some Romans believed excessive leisure could actually weaken a person's moral strength, almost like allowing a sword to rust from disuse. Writers occasionally compared discipline to a muscle. Use it regularly, and it grows stronger. Neglect it, and both body and character begin to soften. Modern science might debate the metaphor. The Romans embraced it enthusiastically. Around midday, you stop near a public fountain where travellers refill clay jugs with cool water. For the first time today, you allow yourself a slow breath. The water sparkles. Pigeons flutter between rooftops. A gentle breeze carries the scent of fresh herbs from a nearby kitchen. For one peaceful moment, Rome almost seems quiet. Then two men nearby begin discussing an upcoming legal dispute. Another worries about grain shipments. A messenger rushes past carrying sealed documents. The spell breaks instantly. Even moments of calm quickly become opportunities for business. You wonder whether anyone here ever simply sits beneath a tree watching clouds drift overhead. Perhaps they do, if they choose the right tree, and make sure no important acquaintance walks by. The city teaches an important lesson. Being busy is not enough. Your busyness must also benefit someone beyond yourself. Helping relatives earns respect. Serving the community earns admiration. Supporting the Republic, or later, the Empire, earns honour. Purely personal pleasure sits much lower on the list. That priority helps explain why Romans admired figures who sacrificed comfort for public service. Stories celebrating famous heroes rarely describe luxurious vacations. Instead, they praise endurance, patience, discipline, duty fulfilled despite hardship. These stories become cultural mirrors. Children hear them, Adults repeat them. Generations slowly shape themselves around them. By late afternoon, the streets begin changing once more. Shops remain busy, but conversations grow slightly less hurried. Long shadows stretch across stone roads as the fierce Mediterranean sun slowly softens. You finally realize something subtle. Romans are not afraid of rest itself. After all, even soldiers must sleep. Farmers pause for meals. Craftsmen eventually set down their tools. The fear lies elsewhere. They fear becoming the sort of person who chooses comfort before responsibility. Because once that habit begins, where does it end? With missed meetings, broken promises, weaker families, a weaker republic, a weaker empire. Whether those fears are justified hardly matters. Entire civilizations often organize themselves around beliefs that feel unquestionably true to the people living inside them. And as you make your way home through streets still buzzing with purpose, you cannot help noticing how completely those beliefs shape every ordinary hour. In Rome, duty does not merely fill your day, it quietly teaches you who you are supposed to become. The afternoon sun hangs high above the rooftops, warming the terracotta tiles until the entire city seems to shimmer beneath a gentle golden haze. Dust rises beneath countless sandals drifting lazily through shafts of sunlight before settling once again onto ancient stone. Somewhere nearby, the smell of fresh fish competes bravely with the far more pleasant aroma of bread emerging from a neighbourhood bakery. Rome is loud, crowded, occasionally smelly, and astonishingly alive. By now, you have noticed something peculiar. Almost everyone works, but not everyone works in the same way. The differences matter more than you first imagine. A senator begins his day discussing laws. A merchant negotiates shipments from distant provinces. A blacksmith shapes glowing iron with practiced strength. A baker wakes while the stars are still visible. A farmer has already spent hours in the fields before many city dwellers have even finished breakfast. Different lives, different duties. Yet one expectation quietly connects them all. No respectable Roman should appear comfortably idle. That expectation becomes surprisingly complicated once wealth enters the picture. Surely, you think, the richest citizens can simply relax whenever they please? Not exactly. In fact, wealthy Romans often feel even greater pressure to appear productive. If you inherit a fortune, people immediately begin watching how you use it. Do you sponsor public games? Do you repair roads? Do you finance temples? Do you serve in public office? Do you host respectable dinners where political alliances quietly strengthen over carefully prepared meals? Money alone earns envy. Using money responsibly earns admiration. Fail to do so and whispers begin almost immediately. He enjoys luxury too much. His father worked harder. He has forgotten traditional Roman values. Reputation remains fragile regardless of how many servants carry your belongings. One of the most recognizable historical facts about Roman society is that wealthy citizens frequently funded public buildings, baths, temples, aqueducts, or festivals as acts of civic generosity. These gifts were certainly generous, but they also reinforced social standing and demonstrated commitment to the community. Public generosity became another form of visible duty. Even charity carried expectations. Meanwhile, ordinary labourers experienced the city very differently. You step into a narrow street where craftsmen work shoulder to shoulder in tiny workshops. A carpenter smooths rough timber until it feels almost like silk beneath his hands. A potter carefully shapes wet clay on a spinning wheel, correcting tiny imperfections long before anyone else would notice them. Nearby, a leatherworker bends patiently over sandals that may eventually carry someone hundreds of miles across the empire. None of these people expect statues in their honour. Most will never become famous. Yet Rome depends upon them every bit as much as it depends upon senators delivering speeches. Without bread, marble means very little. Without shoes, roads become painful. Without tools, armies accomplish nothing. The empire rests upon millions of ordinary working hands. Historians still argue whether Roman elites genuinely appreciated the labour that sustained their society, or whether many writers romanticised hard-working common people while enjoying lives made comfortable by servants and enslaved workers. Ancient texts offer both admiration and remarkable blind spots, leaving modern scholars to piece together a complicated picture. Reality rarely fits neatly into heroic stories. As you continue walking, you pass a luxurious townhouse whose polished doorway gleams in the afternoon light. Inside, servants hurry quietly from room to room. At first glance, it appears the owner enjoys endless leisure. Look closer. Visitors arrive one after another. Business discussions unfold in shaded courtyards. Letters require replies. Financial records demand attention. Political alliances need careful maintenance. Even privilege has its own exhausting schedule. That does not mean life is equally difficult for everyone. Far from it. Rome remains a deeply unequal society. Some people work because they seek honour. Others work because hunger leaves no alternative. Those realities exist side by side every single day. A quirky detail survives from Roman dining customs that perfectly reflects these differences. Wealthy dinner guests sometimes reclined on cushioned couches while eating elaborate meals, something many modern people imagine as endless luxury. Yet these banquets were rarely simple opportunities to relax. They functioned as stages for networking, political conversations, displays of education, and subtle competitions over wit and reputation. Even dinner became work. Imagine trying to enjoy dessert while simultaneously protecting your social status. Suddenly, eating sounds surprisingly stressful. The streets gradually become quieter as the hottest part of the afternoon settles over the city. Some merchants briefly pause beneath awnings for shade. A few workers wipe sweat from their brows before returning to their tasks. For a short while, movement slows, not stops, just slows. That distinction matters. Romans certainly understand fatigue. They understand sore muscles. They understand the need for food, water, and sleep. What they distrust is prolonged idleness without purpose. Purpose gives rest permission. Without purpose, rest begins resembling weakness. You think back to the countless faces you have seen since dawn. Farmers, builders, lawyers, merchants, priests, children carrying messages, women managing households, craftsmen repairing broken tools. Everywhere, people contribute in visible ways. No wonder leisure feels suspicious. A person who contributes nothing challenges the entire rhythm of the city. The rhythm itself almost becomes comforting. Hammer strikes, market voices, footsteps, wagon wheels, temple bells, the occasional impatient donkey reminding everyone that patience has limits. Together they create the soundtrack of an empire convinced that motion equals strength. You begin wondering whether anyone secretly dreams of escaping it all. Perhaps somewhere beyond the crowded streets, beside a quiet olive grove, someone occasionally lies beneath the shade of an ancient tree, simply listening to birds instead of arguments. If they do, they probably return before too many neighbours notice, because appearances continue to matter. As the afternoon slowly gives way toward evening, long shadows stretch across workshops where lamps are already being prepared for nightfall. Another day of labour approaches its end, yet tomorrow's responsibilities are already waiting. Orders must be completed, fields tended, clients visited, accounts balanced, children taught, promises kept. Rome rarely grants the luxury of believing your work is completely finished. There is always another obligation waiting just beyond sunset, and perhaps that endless chain of responsibilities explains why the Romans grew so uneasy with the idea of too much free time. Not because they hated peace, not because they despised happiness, but because they believed that every hour left unused was an hour in which discipline might quietly begin to fade. The afternoon heat finally begins to soften, and with it the city seems to take one long collective breath. Long shadows spill across the forum, stretching between marble columns like dark ribbons. The air no longer burns against your skin. Instead, it carries the comforting scent of olive oil, fresh bread, wood smoke, and the distant sweetness of figs being sold from woven baskets. For the first time today, Rome almost feels gentle. Almost. Because beneath the calmer atmosphere, another force quietly shapes everything you have seen since sunrise. Discipline. Not merely personal discipline, military discipline. Whether you wear armour or not, the Roman army has left its fingerprints on nearly every corner of civilian life. You have not met a legionary today, and yet, in a sense, you have met thousands of them. Their habits echo through the city, their values guide its people, their reputation shadows every citizen. Rome did not become one of history's greatest empires simply because it possessed brave soldiers. Plenty of ancient kingdoms had courageous warriors. Courage alone rarely builds an empire that stretches from rainy Britain to the deserts of Egypt. Consistency does. Order does. Routine does. Those qualities begin long before anyone picks up a sword. As you continue walking, you notice a group of boys pretending to be soldiers in an open square. One child shouts commands with great seriousness. The others scramble into crooked lines, trying very hard to look impressive despite their obvious lack of coordination. One trips over a loose stone, another forgets which direction everyone is supposed to face. A third accidentally pokes himself with a wooden practice spear. Military perfection can apparently wait another decade. The adults watching nearby chuckle quietly. No one scolds the children. Instead, they encourage them. Because discipline is not learned overnight. It is practiced, repeated, absorbed, little by little. One of the most important historical facts about Rome is that the Roman legion became famous for its extraordinary organization. Soldiers trained relentlessly, built roads, constructed camps with remarkable speed, and followed routines so consistent that many historians consider discipline, not sheer numbers, the greatest strength of the Roman military. Winning battles often began with ordinary habits. Wake on time, maintain equipment, follow orders, repeat. Those habits did not remain inside military camps. They seeped into civilian expectations. A reliable merchant earned trust, much like a reliable soldier earned respect. A dependable magistrate resembled a dependable officer. Even fathers sometimes viewed themselves as commanders responsible for maintaining order within the household. Military thinking quietly became cultural thinking. Historians still argue whether Roman civilian society copied military values, or whether both reflected even older traditions rooted in farming communities where cooperation and discipline had always been essential. It is a fascinating question because the answer changes how we understand Rome itself. Did the army shape society, or did society naturally create the army? Perhaps each strengthened the other over centuries. You pause near a training ground where young men practice with wooden weapons considerably heavier than real swords. At first, that seems unnecessarily cruel. Then the logic becomes clear. If training feels harder than battle, real combat becomes slightly easier. Rome applies this philosophy far beyond warfare. Prepare more than necessary. Work harder than expected. Expect less comfort than you desire. Then ordinary life becomes manageable. Modern athletes would recognize the mindset immediately. So would musicians practicing scales, or craftsmen repeating the same careful movement thousands of times. Excellence rarely arrives by accident. A curious detail survives from Roman military life that always surprises people. Legionaries often carried so much equipment that later generations jokingly nickname them Marius's mules, after the general Gaius Marius. Instead of relying heavily on baggage trains, many soldiers hauled their own cooking gear, tools, weapons, food, and personal belongings over astonishing distances. Imagine hiking for miles carrying your kitchen on your back. Suddenly, your grocery bags seem rather reasonable. The discipline extends beyond physical strength. You notice how conversations about successful people almost always include the same qualities: reliable, steady, patient, responsible. Rarely do you hear someone admired because they were wonderfully carefree. Carefree sounds pleasant, dependable sounds Roman. As evening approaches, workers begin packing away tools, shops close one by one, livestock returns through the city gates. Children race through narrow streets until parents call them home. The pace slows. Yet even now, tomorrow quietly occupies everyone's thoughts. A baker checks flour supplies. A merchant counts coins. A carpenter sharpens blades for morning work. Preparation never truly ends. You begin realizing that Rome fears disorder more than exhaustion. Tired people can recover. Disorganized societies may not. Perhaps that fear explains the enormous respect shown toward routine. Routine prevents mistakes. Routine builds confidence. Routine allows millions of strangers to cooperate without constantly renegotiating expectations. The empire itself becomes one enormous habit. Roads maintained, taxes collected, laws enforced, harvests gathered, ships sailing, messages delivered. Every successful day encourages people to repeat yesterday's discipline once again. The sun now hangs low over the western horizon, bathing rooftops in warm amber light. For a brief moment the entire city glows as though carved from bronze instead of stone. It is beautiful enough to make you stop walking. So you do, only for a moment. Nearby an elderly man notices your pause. He smiles politely, then gently asks whether you're waiting for someone, not whether you are admiring the sunset. Waiting for someone. Because standing still must surely have a practical explanation. You smile back and nod. It seems easier than explaining that you simply wanted to enjoy the evening sky. Perhaps that tiny exchange tells you more about Rome than any speech delivered in the Senate ever could. Here, beauty is appreciated, rest is accepted. But both are expected to fit neatly around responsibility. Duty comes first, everything else waits its turn, and as darkness slowly settles across the greatest city in the ancient world, you cannot help wondering whether an empire built upon such relentless discipline gains incredible strength, or quietly asks more of its people than any human heart can comfortably give. The sun slips below the rooftops, leaving only a warm ribbon of orange glowing along the western horizon. One by one, oil lamps flicker to life behind wooden shutters, their soft light spilling into the streets in uneven patches. The day's relentless pace finally begins to slow, and for a brief moment you imagine that Rome is preparing to rest. Then someone begins decorating a temple. Across the street, musicians tune their instruments. Children carry baskets of flowers. Neighbours gather in clean clothing instead of work tunics. You blink. Apparently, even relaxation has a schedule. You have arrived on the eve of a festival. If you were hoping this would finally be your chance to enjoy an entirely carefree evening, Rome has another surprise waiting. Festivals are joyful, they are colourful, they are exciting, but they are rarely effortless. In fact, many Roman celebrations come with their own long list of expectations. People must attend ceremonies. Families prepare special meals. Priests conduct sacrifices. Merchants decorate storefronts. Officials oversee crowds. Musicians rehearse. Servants work even harder than usual. Someone has to sweep the streets after everyone else finishes celebrating. The city transforms itself almost overnight. Fresh greenery appears around doorways. Bright fabrics hang from balconies. The smell of roasted meat drifts through the evening air, mixing with incense rising from temple altars. Laughter echoes between stone buildings. Children race through narrow streets pretending to be heroes from old Roman legends. For a visitor, it feels magical. For the people making it happen, it feels like another day filled with responsibility. One of the most famous historical facts about ancient Rome is that the calendar contained numerous religious festivals dedicated to different gods and goddesses. Events such as the Saturnalia, Lupercalia, and many others brought communities together throughout the year. These celebrations reinforced religious traditions and social bonds while reminding citizens that Rome believed divine favour required continual attention. Even joy became a civic responsibility. You follow the growing crowd toward a nearby temple. The building glows softly beneath dozens of oil lamps. Priests move with calm precision. Nothing appears rushed. Nothing appears careless. Every gesture has meaning. Every offering follows tradition. Every prayer connects the present to generations long gone. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans participated in these ceremonies out of deep personal faith, social expectation, or a mixture of both. Ancient religion rarely separated belief from public life, making it difficult to distinguish sincere devotion from cultural habit. Perhaps the distinction hardly mattered. If everyone gathered together year after year, tradition itself became powerful. You notice something else. Attendance matters. People observe who comes. People notice who stays away. Missing an important festival without good reason can quietly damage your reputation. Not because neighbours assume you dislike celebrations, because they may wonder whether you are neglecting your duties to the gods, and by extension to Rome itself. Religion and citizenship intertwine so completely that separating them feels almost impossible. The celebration grows louder. Musicians begin playing flutes accompanied by steady drum beats. Vendors sell sweet pastries covered with honey. Children laugh while chasing one another between the columns. For a few precious moments, the entire city seems lighter. Then reality quietly returns. Someone must prepare tomorrow's offerings. Someone counts supplies. Someone records expenses. Someone cleans the temple floor after hundreds of visitors pass through. Behind every celebration stand countless invisible workers. A wonderfully quirky Roman tradition appears during certain festivals, when social rules briefly loosen. During Saturnalia, for example, gift-giving became common, and masters and servants sometimes exchanged symbolic roles in playful ways. The holiday could feel surprisingly relaxed compared with ordinary Roman life, though historians caution that these reversals were temporary and carefully contained within the festival itself. Even Rome's most carefree holiday came with boundaries. The Romans understood something many societies discover sooner or later. Celebrations cannot exist without preparation. The feast depends upon the cook. The music depends upon rehearsal. The parade depends upon organisation. The holiday itself becomes another demonstration of discipline. You wander farther through streets illuminated by dozens of dancing flames. The shadows seem softer now. The city's daytime urgency has transformed into evening warmth. Couples stroll together, friends exchange stories. Older citizens smile while remembering festivals from decades earlier. For the first time all day, genuine leisure finally seems visible. Or does it? Listen carefully. One conversation revolves around tomorrow's market. Another discusses a political appointment. Someone worries about grain prices. Another debates military news arriving from distant provinces. Even while celebrating, Rome quietly keeps working. Responsibility never fully leaves the room. Perhaps that explains why festivals matter so deeply. They do not replace duty. They simply wrap it in music, food, laughter, and candlelight. The responsibilities remain exactly where they were. They simply become easier to carry together. As the evening deepens, you find yourself standing near the edge of a public square. The stars slowly appear overhead. A gentle breeze cools the air. For the first time since dawn, you hear something unexpected. Silence. Not complete silence, just enough. The musicians pause. The crowd drifts elsewhere. Even the donkeys seem unusually cooperative. You take one slow breath, then another. Perhaps this is what free time feels like. Not the complete absence of responsibility, not endless idleness, simply a small pocket of peace between obligations. Maybe that is all most Romans ever truly seek. Tomorrow morning the streets will once again fill before sunrise. The bakers will wake first. The merchants will open their stalls. The forum will overflow with ambition. Duty will reclaim every familiar corner of the city. But tonight, beneath the quiet glow of countless oil lamps and the watchful gaze of ancient gods, Rome allows itself one brief smile. Not because responsibility has disappeared, but because for a little while responsibility has learned to dance. Night settles gently across Rome, wrapping the city in deep blue shadows broken only by the warm glow of thousands of oil lamps. The daytime roar of carts and merchants has faded into quieter sounds. Soft conversations drifting through open windows, sandals tapping against stone streets, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere in the distance, and the steady crackle of cooking fires preparing one last meal before sleep. You might think darkness gives everyone a chance to relax. Instead, it gives everyone a chance to observe. Roman streets rarely become completely empty. Someone is always returning from dinner. Someone is carrying water. Someone is finishing work. Someone is simply watching. It is easy to imagine ancient Rome as a place where privacy hardly exists. That impression is not entirely wrong. The city is packed tightly together. Apartment buildings, some rising 5 or 6 stories, lean over narrow streets where voices echo between walls. Windows stand open to catch cooler evening air. Conversations drift from one household to another without anyone trying very hard to listen. Sometimes you hear laughter, sometimes arguments, sometimes babies crying, sometimes a husband promising that tomorrow he really will repair the broken roof. Whether he actually does is another matter. You quickly realise that reputation does not live only in grand speeches or political debates. It lives in ordinary conversations. I saw him helping his elderly neighbour. She always keeps her household in perfect order. They paid their debts on time. I wonder why he has been sleeping so late recently. No official court records these remarks. Yet together they quietly shape how people think about one another. One mainstream historical fact reveals how deeply Romans valued public opinion. Roman politicians frequently sought the support and approval of fellow citizens through speeches, public appearances, and visible acts of generosity. Even after elections or appointments, maintaining public respect remained essential because reputation influenced friendships, business opportunities, and political influence alike. Honour depended upon memory. Memory depended upon people talking. Historians still argue whether Roman society placed unusually intense pressure on public reputation compared with other ancient civilizations, or whether surviving Roman literature simply discusses reputation more openly than texts from elsewhere. Whatever the answer, Roman writers devoted remarkable attention to what neighbours thought of one another. They understood something timeless. People rarely judge you only by what you accomplish. They also judge what they believe about your character. As you continue walking through the quieter streets, you notice an elderly woman sweeping the small area outside her doorway long after sunset. The street is already fairly clean. No one has asked her to continue, yet she does. Perhaps tomorrow's neighbours will notice. Perhaps they will not. Either way, she seems unwilling to leave the task unfinished. A few houses farther along, another family gathers around a simple evening meal. The children listen while their grandfather tells stories of earlier generations. Not stories about becoming rich. Not stories about endless pleasure. Stories about courage, loyalty, keeping promises, serving Rome faithfully. Every tale quietly teaches the same lesson. Character matters because everyone eventually hears about it. Even children absorb that message before they fully understand it. You begin wondering whether anyone in this city has ever escaped public opinion. Probably not. Even the wealthy cannot hide forever. Servants talk, clients notice, neighbours compare, friends remember. Success attracts attention. Failure attracts even more. A surprisingly quirky detail from Roman history illustrates this perfectly. Graffiti covered many walls throughout cities like Pompeii. Some messages praised favourite gladiators or advertised businesses, but others teased neighbours, mocked rivals, declared romantic feelings, or spread jokes. Long before social media, Romans were already leaving public comments about one another for everyone else to read. Apparently anonymous opinions are much older than the internet. The thought makes you smile, then it makes you slightly nervous. Imagine walking outside tomorrow only to discover someone has written, "Marcus still owes me 3 chickens." Not exactly ideal for your reputation. The evening air grows cooler now. Families gradually extinguish lamps one by one. Above you, the stars shine brilliantly in a sky untouched by electric light. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a pale river flowing across the heavens. For a moment, the city feels wonderfully peaceful. Then footsteps approach behind you. A familiar voice greets another passerby. Within seconds, they begin exchanging news. Who married, who argued, who received a promotion, who embarrassed himself during today's public meeting. The city never truly stops talking. Perhaps gossip sounds like a trivial pastime. In Rome, it performs an important social function. Stories encourage good behaviour. Fear of embarrassment discourages selfishness. Praise rewards generosity. Criticism warns others. Of course, gossip also exaggerates, misunderstands, and occasionally invents entire dramas from almost nothing. Human beings have always possessed remarkable imaginations. You begin reflecting on your own day. You woke before sunrise, walked through crowded streets, watched merchants, craftsmen, priests, politicians, and labourers performing their duties, attended religious celebrations, learned how discipline shapes ordinary life. Now another invisible force becomes clear. None of those responsibilities exist entirely because of laws. Many survive because people watch one another. Communities quietly enforce shared expectations. A person determined to spend every afternoon doing absolutely nothing might technically remain free, but socially? The cost could become enormous. Friends might stop trusting them. Business opportunities might disappear. Marriage prospects could weaken. Invitations might quietly stop arriving. The punishment would rarely be dramatic. It would simply arrive one conversation at a time. As midnight slowly approaches, Rome finally grows quieter. Doors close. Lanterns fade. Only the occasional night watchman continues walking through silent streets. His footsteps echo softly against ancient stone. Even now, someone remains awake performing a duty. Because Rome never completely sleeps. And neither, it sometimes seems, does its concern for what everyone else is doing. You glance back one final time before returning home. Behind countless walls, thousands of families prepare for another dawn. Tomorrow they will once again rise early, not merely because work awaits, but because somewhere, someone is always watching. Morning arrives once again with remarkable confidence. Before the eastern sky has fully exchanged deep blue for pale gold, the familiar sounds begin returning to the streets. A rooster announces its importance with impressive enthusiasm. Bakers slide fresh loaves into hot ovens. Water sellers make their rounds. Somewhere nearby, a sleepy mule expresses opinions that are probably unsuitable for polite Roman conversation. You open your eyes already knowing what the day expects of you. That realization feels strangely comforting now. A few days ago, the endless rhythm of Roman life seemed exhausting. Now you begin understanding why so many people embrace it. When everyone knows their place, uncertainty shrinks. Predictability becomes its own kind of security, and nowhere is that lesson taught more carefully than inside the Roman household. Long before a child learns politics, long before they understand military campaigns, long before they hear speeches in the forum, they learn duty at home. Your morning begins inside the atrium of a respectable family house. Soft sunlight filters through the opening in the roof, reflecting gently from the shallow pool beneath. The scent of warm bread mingles with olive oil and fresh herbs. Servants move quietly between rooms while family members prepare for another ordinary day. Nothing feels hurried, everything feels practiced. Children are already awake, not because they particularly wish to be. Children, as history repeatedly demonstrates, possess an extraordinary ability to believe sleep should continue forever. Roman parents are not especially persuaded by this argument. Instead, the day begins with routine. Wash, dress, offer respect to the household gods, eat modestly, listen carefully, observe adults. The lessons rarely arrive as formal lectures. They emerge through repetition, one morning after another, 1 year after another. You notice a young boy following his father through the house. He carries a small writing tablet beneath one arm, trying very hard to imitate the man's confident stride. Occasionally he succeeds. Occasionally he walks directly into a doorway. Growing into adulthood is evidently a gradual process. His father does not laugh. He simply places a steady hand on the boy's shoulder and gently guides him forward. That tiny moment teaches more than a dozen speeches. A Roman child watches far more than he listens. One mainstream historical fact about Roman education is that children from wealthier families often learned reading, writing, arithmetic, rhetoric, and literature, while many others learned practical skills through apprenticeships or household responsibilities. Regardless of social class, education usually aimed to prepare young people for useful roles within society rather than encouraging individual self-expression above all else. The question was rarely, what makes you happiest? It was more often, what prepares you best? Historians still argue whether Roman childhood was significantly stricter than childhood in many neighbouring cultures, or whether surviving sources simply emphasised discipline because elite writers valued it so highly. Children undoubtedly laughed, played games, argued with siblings, and occasionally tested every ounce of their parents' patience. Some things never change. Outside, several children gather in a small courtyard playing with hoops and carved wooden toys. Their laughter echoes cheerfully between nearby houses. For a few moments they look exactly like children anywhere in history. Then an older brother reminds everyone that lessons begin soon. The game ends almost immediately. Play has its place. Duty has its schedule. A wonderfully quirky detail survives from Roman archaeology. Children sometimes kept pets ranging from dogs and birds to tame mice, and even small monkeys brought from distant provinces. Ancient gravestones occasionally commemorate beloved animals with touching inscriptions, reminding us that affection for pets is anything but a modern invention. Even in a civilization famous for discipline, children still loved animals. You smile as a small terrier chases 2 squealing boys around the courtyard with far more excitement than coordination. The dog clearly believes itself victorious. The boys generously allow it to maintain that illusion. As the family prepares to leave home, another lesson quietly unfolds. Respect flows upward. Children greet elders politely. Parents expect good manners. Servants receive instructions calmly. Guests are welcomed appropriately. Every interaction reinforces invisible rules governing Roman society. No single conversation explains these customs. Life itself becomes the textbook. You begin noticing how often adults speak about ancestors, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, relatives who served faithfully, family members who honoured their promises. The past never feels far away. Each generation seems responsible for protecting the reputation handed down by the previous one. Imagine carrying not only your own ambitions, but the honour of people who died decades before you were born. It is a heavy inheritance. Perhaps that explains why Romans sometimes appeared so cautious. One careless decision reflected not merely upon yourself, it reflected upon your family, your descendants, your name. By midday, you accompany a tutor leading several students through passages of famous Latin literature. The children repeat difficult phrases aloud. Some pronounce them beautifully, others stumble magnificently. One boy accidentally transforms a serious sentence into something that makes the entire class burst into laughter. Even the tutor struggles to remain solemn. Learning, fortunately, leaves room for occasional mistakes. What matters is correcting them, again and again. Repetition quietly builds confidence. The Romans trust repetition more than the inspiration. A sudden burst of motivation may disappear tomorrow. Habit remains. As the afternoon sun warms the courtyard, the students finish their lessons and scatter toward home. Books close, wax tablets disappear into satchels. Parents ask what they learned today, not what entertained them. The difference is subtle, yet it shapes an entire civilization. Walking back through the neighbourhood, you begin realizing that Rome never waits until adulthood to teach responsibility. It plants tiny seeds early. Help with simple chores. Respect your elders. Keep your promises. Finish what you begin. Watch carefully. Learn constantly. Someday, those children will become merchants, soldiers, magistrates, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, and community leaders. The habits they practice now will quietly guide countless decisions later. As evening approaches once again, the familiar rhythm returns. Lamps are prepared, meals begin cooking, neighbours greet one another across narrow streets. Another ordinary Roman day gently draws toward its close, and you cannot help noticing that the empire's greatest strength may not lie in its armies or its marble monuments. It may begin much earlier, with children learning one ordinary morning at a time that duty is simply another word for growing up. Another dawn slips quietly over Rome, and by now the rhythm of the city no longer surprises you. The familiar chorus returns almost on cue. The scrape of broom bristles across stone, the clatter of shutters swinging open, merchants greeting one another before business begins, and the rich smell of warm bread drifting from ovens that have been glowing since long before sunrise. Without realizing it, you wake a little earlier than yesterday. No one tells you to. Your body simply begins following Rome's rhythm. That may be the city's greatest achievement. Eventually, discipline no longer feels like an outside force. It becomes habit. You step into the street, joining a steady stream of citizens flowing toward another ordinary day. Nobody seems especially excited. Nobody seems especially miserable either. Instead, everyone carries the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what the morning requires. The baker knows where he belongs. The mason knows what must be repaired. The merchant already calculates today's prices before reaching the market. Even the children seem to understand which path leads toward lessons and which leads toward trouble. Routine, you begin to realize, is invisible architecture. Stone walls shape buildings. Daily habits shape civilizations. One of the most remarkable historical facts about Rome is the extraordinary consistency with which its public institutions functioned for centuries. Roads were maintained, taxes collected, courts convened, markets opened, temples performed rituals, and officials carried out administrative duties with a level of organization that helped govern millions of people spread across 3 continents. Empires are not sustained by dramatic moments alone. They survive through ordinary mornings repeated thousands of times. Historians still argue whether Rome's remarkable stability came primarily from efficient institutions or from deeply ingrained cultural values that encourage citizens to accept responsibility without constant supervision. Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between the two. Strong institutions encourage good habits. Good habits strengthen institutions. Together they reinforce one another until the system seems almost impossible to separate from everyday life. As you pass through the forum once more, something catches your attention. A stone cutter carefully replaces a damaged paving block. It is hardly glamorous work. Very few people stop to watch. No crowd applauds when he finishes. Yet hundreds of strangers will cross that same stone tomorrow without giving it a second thought. That is the curious nature of routine. When it succeeds, people barely notice. Only its absence attracts attention. The same principle seems to govern Roman society. The aqueduct delivers clean water. Nobody celebrates. The grain shipment arrives on time. Business continues. The courts open as expected. Life moves forward. Success often looks surprisingly ordinary. Failure announces itself much more loudly. Nearby, a magistrate reviews legal documents while clerks organise wax tablets with astonishing precision. Every scroll has its place. Every appointment follows a schedule. Every decision becomes another small thread holding the empire together. You begin wondering how many unseen people contribute to this enormous machine each day. Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands spread across distant provinces, each performing one small task, each trusting countless strangers to perform theirs. A wonderfully quirky detail from Roman daily life reveals just how organised they could be. Public baths, although famous for relaxation, often followed recognisable routines. Visitors move through rooms of different temperatures. The warm tepidarium, the hot caldarium, and finally the cool frigidarium. Even leisure, it seems, had its own orderly sequence. Apparently Romans could organise almost anything, even taking a bath. You smile at the thought. Somewhere, surely, there must have been at least one Roman who accidentally walked into the cold room first, and immediately regretted every decision that brought him there. History rarely records such personal disasters. Perhaps, fortunately. As the morning progresses, you notice another invisible habit shaping the city. People prepare before problems appear. Merchants count inventory before shelves empty. Builders inspect walls before they collapse. Farmers watch the skies long before storms arrive. Good preparation prevents unnecessary emergencies. It is not especially exciting. Neither is replacing roof tiles before winter. Yet both quietly save enormous trouble later. The Romans admire this sort of foresight. Waiting until disaster strikes seems almost irresponsible. You begin applying the same thinking to yourself. Without much effort, you straighten your tunic before entering the marketplace. You greet familiar faces politely. You arrive a little earlier than necessary. Nobody specifically instructed you to behave this way. Rome simply rewards people who do. Little by little, the city's expectations become your own. That realization feels strangely unsettling. How much of your personality belongs to you? And how much belongs to the culture surrounding you? Historians continue debating questions very much like this today. Human beings adapt remarkably quickly. Spend enough time anywhere, and local customs begin feeling natural, even when they once seemed unusual. The afternoon carries you toward one of Rome's magnificent public baths. Steam rises gently into the air. Conversations drift between marble columns. Some men discuss politics. Others negotiate business. A few simply enjoy the warm water after long hours of labour. At first glance, this finally appears to be genuine leisure. Yet listen carefully. Deals are arranged, friendships strengthened, information exchanged, appointments scheduled. The baths function almost like another extension of the forum. Relaxation serves practical purposes. Very little exists entirely for itself. As the sun begins lowering toward the western hills, you leave the baths feeling refreshed. Not because you escaped Roman society, because you participated in another one of its carefully maintained routines. The streets glow softly beneath the evening light. Children hurry home. Merchants close wooden shutters. Temple bells echo faintly across the city. Everything unfolds with comforting familiarity. And somewhere inside yourself you notice something surprising. The life that once seemed impossibly demanding no longer feels quite so foreign. The routines have begun shaping you, one ordinary day at a time, one quiet habit after another, until you finally understand that Rome's greatest monument is not its temples, or its roads, or even its armies. It is the invisible routine carried faithfully by millions of ordinary people who rise each morning believing that today's small duties will help hold the entire world together. The evening breeze carries the day's heat away, leaving the streets pleasantly cool beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. Lamps glow behind windows, casting pools of golden light onto the worn paving stones. Somewhere nearby, a woman hums softly while kneading tomorrow's bread. Across the street, a father patiently repairs a wooden stool that could probably survive another decade if left alone. But repairing it now is simply what a careful Roman does. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is neglected. Even ordinary evenings become quiet investments in tomorrow. By now, you have spent enough time in Rome to recognize its invisible heartbeat. You understand why people rise before dawn. You understand why reputation matters. You understand why duty fills nearly every hour. But there is another idea hidden beneath all of it. A fear. Not fear of enemies. Not fear of poverty. Not even fear of death. A fear of becoming soft. To a Roman, softness rarely refers to comfortable cushions or warm blankets. It refers to character. A society that grows too comfortable, many Romans believe, slowly forgets the sacrifices that built it. The first signs are subtle. People begin choosing entertainment over responsibility, luxury over discipline, convenience over effort. One missed obligation hardly matters. Then another, then another. Eventually someone asks whether the old traditions still matter at all. That question alone makes many Romans deeply uneasy. One mainstream historical fact illustrates this concern. Roman writers such as Cato the Elder frequently warned that excessive luxury and foreign extravagance threatened traditional Roman virtues. They admired simplicity, discipline, and self-restraint, believing these qualities had helped transform Rome from a modest city into a powerful republic. Whether they were entirely correct remains another question. Historians still argue whether Rome truly declined because of growing luxury, or whether later writers simply looked back through nostalgic eyes, imagining that earlier generations had been more disciplined than they really were. Every civilization seems to believe its grandparents worked harder. Perhaps your own has said something similar. As you stroll through one of the wealthier districts, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Elegant houses line the street. Marble fountains sparkle beneath moonlight. Gardens overflow with carefully trimmed shrubs and fragrant flowers. Inside one courtyard, musicians entertain guests reclining on richly decorated couches. Silver cups catch the lamplight. Exotic spices perfume the air. At first glance, it appears that these fortunate Romans have escaped the relentless demands of ordinary life. Look a little closer. The host worries whether the dinner impresses influential guests. A senator carefully chooses each word before speaking. Merchants quietly negotiate future business between courses. Poets recite verses hoping to earn admiration. Servants move constantly, ensuring everything appears effortless. Even luxury demands labour. The banquet itself becomes another stage where reputation performs under bright lamplight. A delightfully quirky Roman custom appears during these elaborate meals. Wealthy hosts sometimes served unusual delicacies, from flamingo tongues to dormice prepared with herbs and honey. While such extravagant dishes fascinated some guests, others considered them embarrassingly excessive. proof that certain Romans cared more about showing off than about genuine virtue. Imagine attending dinner only to discover someone proudly presents roasted dormouse as the evening's highlight. You smile politely. You hope dessert arrives soon. The conversation around you slowly turns toward the past. Older guests recall legendary ancestors, military victories, hard winters survived, fields cultivated by hand, simple meals shared around modest tables. Whether those memories are perfectly accurate hardly matters. They create an ideal, and ideals shape behaviour. You begin noticing how often Romans compare themselves with earlier generations. Our fathers were stronger. Our grandfathers were more disciplined. The old ways built this empire. Sound familiar? Across thousands of years, human beings rarely resist believing that yesterday possessed virtues missing today. Perhaps nostalgia is one of history's oldest traditions. Leaving the banquet district behind, you wander toward quieter streets, where ordinary families finish their evening meals. There are no silver plates here, no exotic spices arriving from distant provinces, just warm bread, olives, vegetables, perhaps a little cheese. Children laugh, parents exchange stories from the day's work. The atmosphere feels simpler, not poorer, simply different, and perhaps, in some ways, calmer. The contrast raises an uncomfortable question. Does wealth make life easier, or merely change the kinds of responsibilities people carry? Rome offers no simple answer. The rich worry about influence. The poor worry about survival. Both worry about reputation. The moon climbs higher above the rooftops. Its pale light softens the edges of temples and monuments until the city seems almost dreamlike. For a moment you forget the endless obligations. You simply walk, listening, breathing, watching shadows stretch across empty streets. Perhaps this is genuine leisure after all. Not grand entertainment, not expensive feasts, just quiet reflection beneath the night sky. Yet even now your thoughts return to tomorrow. There will be errands, conversations, promises, responsibilities waiting patiently with the sunrise. Rome has trained your mind remarkably well. Without anyone ordering you, you already think ahead. You prepare. You organize. You anticipate. The habits have quietly taken root. Perhaps that is what the old moralists truly feared losing. Not wealth itself, not beautiful homes, not comfortable lives, but the inner discipline that keeps comfort from becoming complacency. As you make your way home beneath the gentle glow of countless stars, the city around you seems peaceful, almost asleep. Almost. Somewhere a baker is already preparing dough for morning. A watchman continues his slow patrol. A temple priest tends a sacred flame. Even in darkness, someone remains awake protecting tomorrow. And you begin wondering whether Rome's greatest struggle was never against foreign enemies alone, but against the quiet temptation to believe that comfort could safely replace character. A cool breeze greets you before sunrise, carrying the scent of damp earth from gardens beyond the city walls. The stars still linger overhead, reluctant to surrender the sky, while a faint silver glow begins gathering along the eastern horizon. Rome has not fully awakened yet. For a few precious moments, the city belongs to silence. You stand alone in a quiet courtyard. No merchants calling prices, no wagon wheels rattling across stone, no debates echoing through the forum. Only the gentle flutter of birds hidden among cypress trees, and the distant splash of water flowing through an aqueduct that has continued its steady journey all through the night. It feels strangely peaceful. You cannot help wondering whether the Romans themselves ever paused to appreciate mornings like this, or were they already thinking about the day's responsibilities? The answer, it turns out, depends on whom you ask. Not every Roman believed life should consist of endless work. Some argued that discipline mattered above all else. Others believed the greatest challenge was learning how to rest wisely. This is where philosophy quietly enters your journey. Unlike soldiers or politicians, philosophers rarely conquer cities. Instead, they attempt something much more difficult. They try to understand the human mind. One mainstream historical fact is that Seneca the Younger, one of Rome's most influential Stoic thinkers, wrote extensively about time, self-control, and the importance of living deliberately rather than allowing life to slip away through distraction or meaningless busyness. Interestingly, Seneca did not simply praise constant labour. He questioned empty activity. Being busy, he suggested, is not the same as living well. That distinction surprises you. After everything Rome has taught you about duty, you almost expect every philosopher to celebrate endless work. Instead, some ask a different question. What exactly are you working toward? Historians still argue whether Stoic philosophy genuinely influenced everyday Romans, or whether it remained largely the pursuit of educated elites. Philosophical schools certainly shaped influential leaders, but how deeply their ideas reached ordinary craftsmen, merchants, and farmers remains an open question. Even so, the ideas themselves linger. You begin imagining conversation. A merchant boasts that he has spent every waking hour making money. A Stoic quietly asks whether those hours made him wiser. A politician proudly describes countless public meetings. The philosopher wonders whether any improved his character. A wealthy landowner celebrates another luxurious villa. The philosopher asks whether peace of mind can be purchased along with marble columns. Those questions are uncomfortable. Perhaps that is precisely their purpose. Nearby, another thinker belongs to a very different tradition. Followers of the Greek philosopher Epicurus believe happiness comes not through endless luxury, but through modest pleasures, close friendships, freedom from unnecessary fear, and a tranquil life. Many Romans misunderstand them completely. Some assume they encourage reckless indulgence. In reality, Epicurus argues almost the opposite. Simple food, quiet conversation, a peaceful garden. Those are riches enough. Imagine explaining to an ambitious Roman senator that true happiness might be found sharing bread beneath an olive tree with a few trusted friends. He might politely smile, then excuse himself because he has 3 political appointments before lunch. The contrast is fascinating. One path emphasizes duty, another emphasizes inner peace. Neither necessarily rejects work. Both simply ask what work should accomplish. A wonderfully quirky story survives about philosophers in the ancient world who became so absorbed in thought that they occasionally ignored everything happening around them. One famous tale tells of a philosopher so distracted by contemplating the stars that he promptly fell into a well. Whether true or not, the story gently reminds us that thinking deeply sometimes comes with practical disadvantages. Profound wisdom, limited awareness of holes in the ground. The balance remains important. As sunrise finally reaches the rooftops, warm golden light spreads across temples and public squares. Rome begins waking once more, yet your perspective has quietly shifted. You notice people hurrying toward work. Some appear determined, others seem anxious. A few simply follow habits formed years ago. You begin asking yourself a question that never occurred to you during your first morning here. Are they busy because they choose to be, or because they no longer know any other way? Perhaps the answer differs for every individual. One craftsman genuinely loves perfecting his trade. Another dreams of retirement. One magistrate serves from sincere devotion. Another quietly enjoys the prestige. Human motivations rarely fit neatly into simple categories. Walking through the Forum again, you pass a sculptor carefully polishing a marble statue. Each slow movement removes only tiny fragments of stone. The changes seem almost invisible. Yet hour after hour, the rough block gradually becomes something beautiful. You pause to watch. The sculptor notices. Instead of hurrying, he smiles. Some work his expression seems to say, cannot be rushed. That thought lingers with you. Perhaps Rome's greatest mistake would not be working too hard. Perhaps it would be forgetting why the work matters in the first place. The city grows busier around you. Children head toward lessons. Merchants arrange goods. Lawyers gather documents. Priests prepare ceremonies. The familiar rhythm resumes. But now, hidden beneath the noise, you hear another rhythm, a quieter one, the rhythm of reflection. Because somewhere between relentless duty and endless leisure lies a narrow path that philosophers have searched for across centuries. Not a life without responsibility, not a life consumed entirely by it, a life where work strengthens the soul, instead of quietly replacing it. The morning unfolds with the familiar certainty you've come to expect. Sunlight slips over tiled rooftops, illuminating narrow streets that no longer feel unfamiliar. Shopkeepers lift wooden shutters with practiced movements. Bakers carry baskets of steaming bread into the marketplace. The smell of rosemary, olives, fresh cheese, and warm grain adrift through the cool air, mixing with the faint scent of smoke from countless household fires. Rome is awake again, but today something feels different. You're no longer looking only at what Romans are expected to do. You begin noticing what they quietly enjoy. Because despite everything you have learned about duty, discipline, and reputation, Romans are still human. And humans have always found small ways to steal moments of happiness. Not grand holidays, not endless vacations, tiny escapes, the kind that fit between responsibilities without attracting too much attention. You follow a narrow lane away from the crowded forum until the city becomes noticeably quieter. Here, life moves at a gentler pace. An old gardener carefully trims herbs growing beside a courtyard wall. Two elderly neighbours sit beneath the shade of a fig tree discussing the weather with the seriousness of experienced philosophers. Neither seems to be in any particular hurry. Perhaps growing older earns a little more patience. Nearby, a young craftsman pauses after finishing a difficult piece of work. He stretches his tired shoulders, closes his eyes for just a few breaths, and quietly enjoys the cool morning breeze before returning to his workshop. Nobody criticizes him, because his rest has been earned. That is an important distinction. Throughout your journey, you have noticed that Romans rarely object to recovery after honest effort. What they distrust is comfort without contribution. One mainstream historical fact beautifully illustrates this balance. Public gardens, porticos, and open spaces around Rome provided places where citizens could walk, talk, and briefly escape the crowded streets. While these areas were not parks, in the modern sense, they offered moments of calm within one of the busiest cities in the ancient world. Even the world's greatest empire needed quiet corners. Historians still argue how much genuine leisure ordinary Romans actually enjoyed. Wealthy writers naturally left behind more records than labourers, making it difficult to measure free time across different social classes. A prosperous senator and a struggling dock worker almost certainly experienced leisure very differently. History often preserves the voices of those with time to write. The busiest people rarely leave diaries. You continue walking until laughter catches your attention. Several children have gathered beside a fountain, floating tiny handmade boats across the shallow water. The boats are wonderfully uneven. One immediately tips over. Another sails proudly for several seconds before colliding dramatically with a stone. The children cheer anyway. Success apparently is optional. Enjoyment is not. Watching them, you remember something easily forgotten. The Roman world is not built entirely upon seriousness. There is humour here, playfulness, affection. Parents smile as they watch. Grandparents quietly offer advice no one requested. Dogs wander hopefully in search of dropped food. Life, despite its burdens, remains wonderfully alive. A delightfully quirky detail survives from Roman gaming culture. People throughout the empire enjoyed board games, dice games, and strategy games remarkably similar to those played today. Archaeologists have even discovered game boards carved directly into stone steps and public benches, suggesting that whenever someone found a spare moment, they were perfectly willing to challenge a friend to a quick match. Apparently, waiting for an appointment has inspired games for thousands of years. Some habits never disappear. As midday approaches, the sun climbs higher, encouraging many people to seek shade beneath long colonnades. You join them. Cool stone columns protect you from the heat, while gentle breezes flow through the open walkways. Several scholars quietly debate literature. A merchant reads correspondence from a distant province. A musician experiments with a melody so soft it almost disappears beneath the murmur of passing conversations. No one rushes them. For a little while, the city seems content simply to exist. You realise that Rome possesses two different rhythms. The first is loud: markets, politics, business, construction, military organisation. The second is much quieter: reading, conversation, music, walking, reflection. Both rhythms belong to the same civilization. The quieter one simply receives less attention, perhaps because it produces fewer monuments. A peaceful conversation rarely results in a triumphal arch. Yet it may shape a life just as deeply. You think back to Seneca's questions from yesterday. Is being busy the same as living well? Looking around you now, the answer seems clearer. Some people hurry because they must. Others pause because they wisely understand when enough has been accomplished. The challenge lies in recognizing the difference. As afternoon light softens, you encounter an elderly teacher sitting beneath an olive tree with 3 young students. There are no grand classrooms, no marble lecture halls, only shade, curiosity, and quiet voices. Occasionally the teacher stops speaking. No one interrupts. The silence itself becomes part of the lesson. Modern classrooms often fear silence. Ancient wisdom sometimes welcomed it. Hours pass almost unnoticed, not because nothing happens, because nothing needs to happen quickly. The breeze stirs olive branches overhead. Birdsong fills the pauses between conversations. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a temple bell echoes faintly across the city. You begin understanding that Romans did not completely reject leisure. They simply expected leisure to restore the mind rather than replace responsibility. A walk could refresh you. A thoughtful discussion could strengthen friendships. Music could calm the spirit. Games could sharpen the mind. But eventually, you return to your duties. The balance mattered. As evening approaches once again, golden sunlight bathes Rome in a warm glow that softens even its busier streets. You pause beside the fountain where the children played earlier. The little boats are gone now. Only gentle ripples remain. Small moments leave surprisingly lasting memories. Perhaps that is the real secret hidden beneath Rome's relentless discipline. Even the busiest civilization on Earth quietly survives because ordinary people keep finding tiny pockets of peace, small enough to fit inside a single afternoon, yet powerful enough to carry them into tomorrow. Another sunrise arrives almost unnoticed. By now, the rhythm of Rome feels so familiar that you wake a heartbeat before the first cart rolls across the street. The city has quietly taught your body its schedule. Before opening your eyes, you already know what you will hear. The baker's oven, the sweep of a broom, the splash of water into clay jars, the murmur of voices growing steadily louder as another day begins. Habit has become instinct. For weeks you have watched Rome celebrate discipline with remarkable confidence. Duty comes first. Reputation matters. Responsibility shapes character. Those ideas seem as solid as the marble temple surrounding you, yet no civilization remains perfectly unchanged forever. Even Rome evolves, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. You begin noticing small differences that earlier escaped your attention. The marketplace offers goods from astonishing distances, silks from the east, spices whose names many citizens can barely pronounce, glass so delicate it seems almost impossible to create by human hands, perfumes carrying unfamiliar scents from lands beyond the empire's borders. Rome has become enormously wealthy. Success brings choices, and choices always change people. One mainstream historical fact illustrates this transformation. As the Roman world expanded across the Mediterranean, trade networks connected the empire with regions stretching far beyond its borders. Exotic goods, new ideas, unfamiliar customs, and immense fortunes flowed into Roman cities, gradually reshaping everyday life for many citizens. Victory, it turns out, creates its own challenges. Historians still argue whether increasing prosperity weakened traditional Roman values or merely revealed that those values had always been more flexible than later moralists admitted. Ancient authors often blamed luxury for social decline, while modern scholars point out that societies naturally adapt as they grow larger, richer, and more diverse. Perhaps both perspectives contain pieces of the truth. Walking through the forum, you overhear two elderly men debating exactly this question. One insists the younger generation lacks discipline. The other reminds him that older generations have complained about younger ones for as long as anyone can remember. You smile quietly. Some conversations appear completely immune to history. Nearby, a prosperous merchant proudly displays imported fabrics, unlike anything woven in Italy a century earlier. Customers admire brilliant colours. Children stare in amazement. An older passerby shakes his head disapprovingly. Too extravagant, his expression seems to say. Fashion, apparently, has always inspired disagreement. A wonderfully quirky detail from Roman history captures this changing world perfectly. Wealthy households sometimes owned decorative peacocks, exotic parrots, or other unusual animals imported from distant provinces. For some, these creatures symbolize success and the vast reach of Roman trade. For others, they represented unnecessary extravagance and a growing taste for luxury. Imagine trying to explain to your neighbours that you purchased an imported parrot because ordinary chickens seemed insufficiently impressive. The Romans, much like people today, occasionally enjoyed showing off, yet beneath these new luxuries, older habits remain remarkably strong. Farmers still rise before dawn, soldiers continue drilling, craftsmen patiently perfect their work, parents still teach children responsibility before comfort. The foundations remain. Only the decorations begin changing. You wander toward one of the city's newer neighbourhoods, where freshly built houses stand beside structures older than anyone alive can remember. The contrast feels symbolic. Ancient traditions, new ambitions, old values, new opportunities. Rome somehow carries both at once. You begin wondering whether anyone living here fully notices the transformation. Probably not. History rarely announces itself. People simply adapt one small decision at a time. A merchant buys foreign spices. His children grow accustomed to unfamiliar flavours. Their children assume those flavours have always existed. Within 3 generations, something once considered extraordinary becomes ordinary. Culture changes quietly. The afternoon grows warmer, encouraging many citizens to gather beneath shaded porticos. Conversations drift from politics to business, then to family matters and rumours arriving from distant provinces. News travels surprisingly quickly across an empire connected by remarkable roads. Some reports celebrate prosperity. Others describe political uncertainty. Still others mention troubles along distant frontiers. Life remains complicated. Success never eliminates every problem. Watching the crowds, you notice something comforting. Despite changing fashions, despite increasing wealth, despite endless debates, most Romans still begin each morning exactly as their parents taught them. Work first, promises kept, family honoured, community respected, the city's heartbeat continues. Perhaps that is why great civilizations rarely collapse all at once. They evolve gradually. Traditions bend before they break. New ideas settle beside old customs. Some changes strengthen society. Others create tensions no one immediately recognizes. Only centuries later do historians look backward, trying to identify the precise moment everything shifted. Usually there isn't one. As the sun begins descending toward the western hills, golden light washes across temples, markets, and rooftops alike. The same sunlight shines upon ancient stone and newly imported marble without preference. Time treats every generation equally. You pause near the edge of the forum, listening to hundreds of conversations blending into one endless murmur. Some voices defend tradition, others welcome change. Most simply worry about tomorrow's ordinary responsibilities. Life continues. That may be history's greatest secret. Civilizations do not experience every day as a turning point. Most mornings feel wonderfully ordinary. People wake, work, laugh, argue, eat dinner, go to sleep. Only later do future generations realize they were living through moments that quietly reshaped the world. You take one last look across the bustling city. Rome still believes discipline built its greatness. Many citizens continue believing discipline will preserve it. Whether that confidence proves entirely justified remains uncertain. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Even the strongest traditions must eventually learn how to share space with a changing world. The evening settles over Rome with the quiet confidence of an old friend. The blazing heat has faded, replaced by cool air flowing gently through narrow streets and open courtyards. Oil lamps flicker behind wooden shutters, painting warm circles of light across ancient stone. Above the city, countless stars emerge one by one, just as they have for generations beyond counting. You've walked these streets long enough now that they no longer feel foreign. You know where the bakers begin their day. You know which fountain offers the coldest water. You know which corner fills first with merchants every morning. You know when the temple bells will ring. Most importantly, you understand why Rome never trusted too much free time. But something else has changed. You've begun seeing the city not only through Roman eyes, but through your own. You find yourself quietly comparing this world with the one you left behind. Thousands of years separate the two. Yet the similarities are impossible to ignore. People still worry about reputation, still chase success, still measure themselves against neighbours, still wonder whether they are doing enough. Technology changes. Human nature rarely does. One mainstream historical fact reminds you just how lasting Rome's influence became. After the Western Roman Empire declined, many Roman ideas about law, citizenship, public administration, engineering, and education continued shaping societies across Europe and beyond for centuries. Even today, countless legal systems and public institutions reflect ideas first refined during the Roman world. Empires may fade, ideas travel much farther. Historians still argue which part of Rome's legacy proved most important. Some emphasize law. Others point toward engineering, military organization, language, or political institutions. Increasingly, scholars also examine Roman cultural values, the habits, expectations, and beliefs that quietly influenced everyday behavior. Those invisible ideas can outlive monuments. A road eventually crumbles. A bridge requires repair. A building collapses. A habit can survive for thousands of years. As you wander slowly through the forum for what feels like the final time, you notice details that once escaped your attention. The stone beneath your feet has been polished smooth by countless generations. Each worn step represents millions of ordinary journeys. Merchants, children, soldiers, priests, travellers, widows, farmers, politicians. Every one of them believed their own daily routine mattered. Together, those routines created history. A delightfully quirky reminder of Rome's lasting influence survives in something surprisingly ordinary. The names of several months in the modern calendar, including Julius Caesar and Augustus, still honour Roman leaders more than 2,000 years later. Most people glance at a calendar without giving it a second thought, yet Rome quietly accompanies them every single month. History sometimes hides in plain sight. You smile at the thought. Somewhere Julius Caesar would probably be pleased that people still say his name so often, although perhaps he imagined slightly more dramatic circumstances than checking a dentist's appointment. The city grows quieter as families gather for their evening meals. Laughter drifts through open windows. The smell of roasted vegetables, herbs, and fresh bread fills the air once more. Children excitedly describe their day. Parents discuss tomorrow's plans. Grandparents occasionally interrupt to explain how everything was undoubtedly better 50 years ago. Certain traditions appear truly eternal. You pause beside a small fountain where water continues flowing with patient consistency. The sound reminds you of something. Not a battle, not a political speech, not a triumphal parade. A heartbeat. Rome has always possessed a heartbeat. Not its armies, not its emperors, its people. Ordinary people. The woman baking bread before dawn, the mason repairing cracked stone, the teacher guiding restless children, the merchant honouring a promise, the farmer trusting another season, the watchman staying awake while everyone else sleeps. They rarely appear in grand paintings, yet without them, there would be no empire to remember. The realization feels strangely comforting. History is often presented as the story of extraordinary individuals. Living here has taught you something different. History also belongs to ordinary mornings, ordinary kindness, ordinary discipline, ordinary perseverance. The stars brighten overhead. The streets gradually empty. Even the Forum, so crowded only hours earlier, now rests beneath quiet moonlight. You realize your own pace has slowed. You're no longer hurrying anywhere. Perhaps Rome has finally given you permission to stop. Or perhaps you have simply learned that rest carries greatest meaning after responsibility has been fulfilled. Either way, the silence feels earned. You think back to your very first morning here. You feared the endless expectations. You wondered how anyone could survive a society so devoted to work. Now you understand that the Romans were chasing something larger than productivity alone. They believed discipline protected families, protected communities, protected traditions, protected the future itself. Whether they always succeeded is another question. Whether they sometimes demanded too much is beyond doubt. No civilization is perfect. Neither was Rome. Yet its people left behind an enduring lesson. A meaningful life is rarely built from a handful of extraordinary moments. More often, it is built from thousands of ordinary choices repeated faithfully over time. The last lamps begin disappearing behind closed shutters. A cool wind stirs the cypress trees beyond the city walls. Tomorrow, another sunrise will awaken Rome. Another generation will rise before dawn. Another child will learn responsibility. Another craftsman will sharpen his tools. Another family will gather around its evening meal. And somewhere, far beyond anything the Romans could possibly imagine, their quiet ideas about duty, work, and purpose will continue echoing, long after the empire itself has become history. The city sleeps more deeply than you have ever seen before. Moonlight pours gently across marble temples, empty marketplaces, and silent streets that only hours ago pulsed with life. The last watchman disappears around a distant corner, his lantern becoming a tiny golden star against the darkness before fading from view. Somewhere beyond the city walls, an owl calls softly into the night. For the first time since your journey began, no one seems to be hurrying. No one appears to be watching. No one expects anything from you. You stand alone in the Forum, the same place that greeted senators before sunrise. The same place where merchants bargained, children laughed, philosophers debated, priests prayed, and ordinary citizens spent countless days proving themselves useful. Now it belongs only to shadows. You take a slow breath. The cool night air smells faintly of olive trees, old stone, extinguished lamps, and distant sea wind drifting inland from the Mediterranean. Rome finally feels still, and perhaps that stillness allows you to understand the city more clearly. than all the busy mornings combined. Throughout your journey, you searched for an answer. Why did the Romans seem to distrust free time? Surely they understood the comfort of resting tired muscles. Surely they appreciated laughter with friends. Surely they enjoyed quiet evenings beneath the stars. Of course they did. They were human. They loved. They worried. They celebrated birthdays. They mourned lost family members. They teased one another. They played games. They told stories beside evening fires. The Romans never hated rest. They feared what unchecked idleness might become. They believed that habits shaped character. Character shaped families. Families shaped society. And society determined whether Rome remained strong. One mainstream historical fact reflects this belief with remarkable clarity. Roman authors repeatedly praised the virtues of disciplina, gravitas and virtus, qualities associated with self-control, seriousness of purpose, courage and responsibility. While real life was always more complicated than these ideals suggested, generations of Romans looked to them as guiding principles for both private and public life. Historians still argue how faithfully ordinary citizens lived according to those ideals. Some evidence suggests that everyday Romans often balanced duty with laughter, entertainment and personal enjoyment far more naturally than elite moralists admitted. Perhaps every civilization creates impossible standards, then quietly lives somewhere in between. You smile at that thought. It feels reassuring. No society has ever been perfectly disciplined. None has ever been perfectly relaxed either. Human beings have always wandered back and forth between responsibility and comfort, forever trying to discover the right balance. A charming little detail survives from Roman life that seems especially fitting tonight. Archaeologists have uncovered simple personal objects, children's toys, worn sandals carefully repaired more than once, handwritten letters between friends, and tiny household decorations never intended for public admiration. These ordinary belongings remind us that behind the statues and triumphs lived millions of people whose greatest achievements were often invisible to history. History remembers emperors. Life remembers families. You begin walking slowly through the empty streets one final time, past the baker whose ovens will glow again before dawn, past the blacksmith whose hammer will ring across the neighbourhood, past the school where children will once again recite lessons, past the fountain where little wooden boats floated only yesterday. Every place now carries a memory. Every memory quietly joins the next. You realise something unexpected. Rome has not simply shown you how its people lived. It has shown you how civilizations quietly build themselves, not through one glorious victory, not through one brilliant ruler, but through millions of ordinary decisions. One promise kept, one lesson taught, one road repaired, one loaf baked, one neighbour helped, one responsibility accepted without applause. That is rarely the version of history painted onto palace ceilings, yet it is probably the truest one. The eastern horizon begins changing once more, almost imperceptibly. Black becomes deep blue, blue softens into grey, grey slowly welcomes pale gold. Another sunrise approaches, another day prepares to begin. Somewhere, a baker is already awake. Somewhere else, a mother quietly prepares breakfast. A farmer steps into cool morning air. A merchant unlocks his shop. Children rub sleepy eyes before another day of lessons. The rhythm continues. It always has. Long after great generals disappear. Long after emperors become names in dusty books. Long after magnificent buildings crumble beneath wind and rain. The simple rhythm of ordinary life carries civilization forward. You take one final look behind you. The Forum glows softly beneath the first light of dawn. It is no longer merely a collection of stones. It has become a memory. A reminder that every age believes its struggles are unique, yet every generation asks surprisingly familiar questions. How should we spend our time? What do we owe one another? How much work is enough? When have we earned the right to rest? The Romans answered those questions in their own way. Not perfectly, not permanently, but sincerely. And perhaps sincerity is what history remembers most kindly. The city begins waking once again. You could stay. You know the streets now. You know the people. You even know which donkey complains loudest before breakfast. But your journey has reached its quiet conclusion. You leave Rome carrying no treasure, no military victories, no political office, only a deeper appreciation that the smallest daily habits, repeated over years and shared across generations, possess the extraordinary power to shape the destiny of nations. The marble temples gradually disappear behind morning mist. The sounds of the city fade into gentle echoes. Your footsteps become lighter. The centuries begin slipping quietly away. And Rome, with all its discipline, ambition, flaws, wisdom, laughter, and endless mornings, finally lets you rest. Now the streets become softer in your memory, as though they are drifting behind a light morning fog. The voices that once filled every corner fade into distant murmurs, leaving only the quiet rhythm of your breathing and the gentle image of ancient stone slowly warming beneath another Roman sunrise. There is nothing more you need to accomplish tonight. No appointments await you. No magistrate is watching. No hurried footsteps ask you to keep pace. The empire continues without you now, carried by countless ordinary people beginning another familiar day, just as they always have. You have walked beside them. You have shared their mornings, their work, their festivals, their hopes, and their quiet fears. Now you may simply let those memories settle peacefully, like dust resting upon old marble after a long summer afternoon. Perhaps somewhere in your imagination, the baker is sliding fresh bread into the oven once again. Perhaps a child is laughing beside a fountain. Perhaps an old philosopher is smiling beneath an olive tree, still wondering whether wisdom comes from working harder or from learning when enough has already been done. The answer no longer feels urgent. It can wait. Like the slow turning of the stars above Rome, everything finds its own gentle rhythm in time. Allow the city to grow more distant. The temples fade. The markets grow quiet. The roads stretch peacefully toward the horizon until they disappear into soft morning light. Only calm remains. Only stillness. Only the comforting reminder that history is not merely a story of emperors and battles, but of ordinary lives lived one day at a time. Thank you for wandering through ancient Rome tonight. May the quiet strength of its people and the peaceful silence that finally settles over its timeless streets accompany you gently into restful sleep.